Under the soft orange light of Valora's twin suns, young cadet Arya Tisen stood among the rows of her fellow recruits. Her long gray uniform caught the dust that drifted across the academy courtyard, but she didn't move to brush it off. She was too focused on the speech being given by the training commander, a tall, strict man with scales along his jaw. His voice echoed across the courtyard, calm and certain. "Humanity," he said, "is a species that gave up war long ago. They now serve as diplomats, healers, and traders. They no longer fight. They have evolved beyond the need for violence." Arya listened carefully, repeating the words in her mind. She had grown up hearing the same thing from teachers, from the broadcast lessons, even from her mother. Humans were strange creatures from a distant blue world, once fierce, now peaceful. The galaxy spoke of them as a species of dreamers and negotiators. They had built cities that floated on oceans and ships that carried food to starving planets. Not warriors, not soldiers. Those days were long gone, the instructors said. And yet something about the way they said it always made Arya wonder. Why speak so much about what humanity used to be if there was nothing to fear anymore? When the ceremony ended, her group was assigned to a special escort mission. The details were brief. They were to accompany a Terran envoy on a short inspection route along the frontier border, where raider activity had recently been reported. Arya's small group of cadets was thrilled. This would be their first real mission outside the academy walls, and most of all, they would meet a real human. That evening, as the twin suns sank below the horizon, Arya stood at the landing platform. The ship assigned to them, the Serath, was an old patrol cruiser patched and dented from past service. The air smelled of metal and fuel. Around her, her squadmates whispered excitedly. "I heard humans look soft," one said, "like they bruise easy." Another added with a laugh. Arya stayed quiet. She didn't like mocking anyone, especially not someone she hadn't met. But she was curious too. What did a human look like? Would they really be as calm and harmless as everyone said? Moments later, a small shuttle descended from orbit, its engines humming gently. When the ramp lowered, a tall man stepped out. He wore a dark uniform with a faded Terran insignia on the sleeve. His hair was short, his skin slightly tanned, and his eyes, gray, sharp, and tired, moved slowly across the crew like he was counting every face. "Commander Ryan Hale," the captain of the Serath announced. "Representative of the Terran Alliance." The human nodded politely. "It's an honor to serve alongside you." His voice was calm, steady, and deep. No arrogance, no nerves, just quiet confidence. Arya couldn't look away. There was something strange about him. Not strange in appearance, he looked normal enough, but in the way he carried himself. Every step was measured, every movement precise. He looked like someone who was always alert, always ready for something unseen. During the voyage, Ryan mostly kept to himself. He sat alone in the mess hall, reading from an old data pad, occasionally sipping something dark from a metal cup. He never joined in the loud laughter or the games the others played. When they entered asteroid belts or empty sectors, Arya often found him standing at the observation deck, hands clasped behind his back, staring out into space. Once, she dared to ask him a question. "Commander, is it true humans don't fight anymore?" He turned his head slightly, studying her face before answering. "We prefer not to." It wasn't the answer she expected. There was something heavy behind those words, something unsaid. The next day, during a training break, Arya overheard two of her squadmates talking about him again. "He's so stiff," one said, "always checking exits like he's waiting for an attack." "Maybe he's just nervous," another joked. Old habits from when humans did fight. Arya laughed softly with them, but she felt uneasy. She had seen the scars on Ryan's hands, small white lines, faded but real. They didn't look like the marks of someone who spent his life in peace. Later, as the ship passed through a quiet sector, the captain asked Ryan to review the security layout for the next station. Ryan agreed and spent hours going over maps, scanning for weak points. Arya passed by the control room and saw him studying every detail like a man preparing for battle. It made her heart beat faster, though she didn't know why. That night, Arya sat in her bunk thinking. She remembered her commander's words, humans no longer fought. But everything she had seen in Ryan Hale suggested the opposite. His silence wasn't peace. It was restraint, like a fire kept carefully inside a glass jar. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of the old stories, of Earth's ancient soldiers who had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. She dreamed of burning skies and soldiers standing side by side, not out of air with a small scanner, then nodded for the rest of the team to follow. Arya came down the ramp behind him, feeling the dry air sting her skin. The smell was strange, like burnt metal mixed with dust. Their mission was simple: escort Ryan to the main hub where he would meet the local foreman and discuss supply routes for the frontier colonies. Nothing about it sounded dangerous, yet Ryan moved as if danger was already near. His eyes scanned every shadow, every rooftop, every corner where something might hide. Captain Velen, the alien in charge of their small unit, laughed. "Relax, human. There hasn't been a single raider attack in this sector for months." Ryan didn't smile. "That's what worries me." Arya glanced at him. He spoke quietly, but his tone carried weight. She couldn't tell if he was joking or serious. When she asked softly what he meant, he only replied, "Silence before a storm is the loudest thing in the world." Inside the outpost, the halls were nearly empty. Dust clung to the floor. A few miners greeted them nervously, avoiding eye contact. The lights flickered overhead as if the power system was struggling to stay alive. Arya walked close behind Ryan, watching how carefully he moved. Every few steps he would pause, listen, then keep walking. They reached the main control room where the foreman, a thin alien with trembling hands, waited for them. His voice shook as he spoke. "We're glad to see the Terran envoy. We had some troubles recently. Power loss, missing shipments." Ryan asked a few calm questions, his tone polite but firm. When the foreman mentioned that communication relays had gone offline last week, Ryan's face grew thoughtful. "Did you send for repairs?" "Yes, but the repair team never arrived," the foreman admitted. "We thought maybe pirates." Before he could finish, the lights went out. The room plunged into darkness. Only the soft red glow from emergency lights remained. The station alarm didn't sound. The silence felt heavy, pressing against the ears. Ryan moved instantly, pulling a small handheld light from his belt. "Stay close," he ordered quietly. Arya's heart began to race. She could barely see anything except Ryan's calm face in the faint beam of light. Captain Valen started shouting for his soldiers to check the corridor, but Ryan stopped him. "No," he said firmly. "They want us to move. Stay here." A second later, the first sound of blaster fire echoed through the hallways. Screams followed. The team ducked behind overturned tables as sparks burst through the control room door. Raiders, dozens of them, flooded in through the maintenance tunnels, wearing scavenged armor and masks. Their weapons flashed blue in the dark. The cadets panicked, firing wildly, shouting into broken comms. Arya's hands trembled as she tried to aim. She had trained for this in simulations, but nothing in the academy felt this real, this loud, this terrifying. Then, in the chaos, she saw Ryan. He didn't panic. He didn't even reach for a gun. He crouched beside her, his voice low and steady. "Take this," he said, handing her a compact energy shield. "Stay behind cover. Don't waste shots." "What about you?" she asked. He didn't answer. He just gave a small nod and stood up. Before she could stop him, he stepped out into the open, into the fire. The room exploded with light and sound. Laser bolts flew in every direction. Arya screamed for him to get down, but Ryan was already moving, faster than she thought a human could move. He dodged between tables, kicked one forward to block fire, and grabbed a fallen raider's weapon in one smooth motion. In the dim red light, his calm expression didn't change. Every shot he fired was clean, precise, controlled. He wasn't shouting or growling like the others. He moved like he had done this 1,000 times before, like his body remembered something ancient. Arya watched in frozen disbelief. This wasn't the peaceful human her teachers had described. This was something else, something quiet and terrifying in its discipline. One of the raiders tried to flank from the side. Ryan turned, threw his shoulder into him, and drove him into the wall with enough force to knock him out cold. Another rushed forward with a blade. Ryan sidestepped and struck the raider's wrist, disarming him before landing a single blow that sent the weapon clattering away. Within minutes, the control room was silent again, except for the sound of heavy breathing. Smoke drifted in the air. The few surviving raiders fled into the tunnels, shouting to retreat. Arya slowly stood, her ears ringing. Around her, her squad mates stared at Ryan with wide eyes. Captain Velen finally broke the silence. How did you?" Ryan looked at him, wiping dust from his uniform. "Training," he said simply. Then he looked at Arya. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, still trying to find words. You said humans don't fight anymore. He met her gaze, expression unreadable. We don't, he said softly, reloading the captured weapon. But we remember how. Arya didn't know what to say. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the horizon, but she couldn't tell if it was a storm or more gunfire. As the emergency lights flickered back to life, she saw the human's face clearly again. Calm, tired, and somehow sad. In that moment, she realized something she would never forget. Humans might choose peace, but beneath that peace lived an instinct older than any empire. A strength held back by choice, not weakness. And for the first time in her life, Arya felt both safe and afraid in the same breath. The smoke from the broken panels still hung in the air. The metallic scent of burnt wiring filled the control room. Arya sat against the wall, her heart still racing. Around her, the cadets were trying to make sense of what had just happened. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the backup generator starting again. Ryan Hale stood near the doorway, staring into the dark corridor where the raiders had fled. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, alert, and focused on something only he could feel. When Captain Velen finally found his voice, it was shaky. They shouldn't have known we were coming. This route was secret. Ryan looked over his shoulder. Someone told them, he said quietly. No one answered. Arya pushed herself up, still holding the small energy shield he had handed her. Commander, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. How did you know they would attack? He walked toward the window, watching the empty landing field below. Because I've seen it before. The silence, the missing signals, the nervous workers. It's the same pattern every time before a strike. Arya wanted to ask where he had seen such things, but she stopped herself. His tone didn't invite questions. It carried the weight of memories. Captain Velen ordered the group to check the wounded and secure the room. 2 cadets mean like surgical marks. They were rough, uneven, old. She wondered what kind of peaceful envoy carried wounds like that. Outside the control room, a low rumble echoed. Dust fell from the ceiling. Everyone froze. Ryan turned toward the sound, his body tense. He picked up one of the dropped rifles and checked its charge. They're regrouping, he said simply. Captain Velen frowned. How can you be sure? Because that's what I would do, Ryan replied. His calm voice made the words even more unsettling. The captain opened his mouth to argue, but the ground shook again. A few seconds later, distant explosions rolled across the valley. The raiders were firing from the hills, trying to destroy the ship before it could take off. Get your people to the landing pad, Ryan ordered. I'll hold them here, Velen hesitated. That's madness. You'll be surrounded. Ryan gave a small smile, almost tired. Then they won't miss me. Arya stepped forward without thinking. I'll stay, she said quickly. Ryan looked at her, his expression unreadable. No, you're not ready for what's coming. She didn't move. With respect, Commander, I can shoot and I can cover. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he handed her a spare energy cell. Stay close. Don't fire unless you have a clear line. The next minutes passed in a blur. The small team moved through the dim halls toward the exit tunnel. The sound of gunfire and explosions grew louder with each step. When they reached the main gate, Ryan stopped and crouched behind a fallen support beam. He gestured for Arya to take the right flank. She followed, trying to breathe quietly. The first raider appeared on the ridge, then another and another. There were too many. Energy bolts tore through the air, striking the walls around them. The ground shuddered as one of the fuel tanks exploded in the distance. Ryan stayed calm. Every movement was deliberate, every decision instant. He used broken machinery as cover, redirected enemy fire toward the rocks, and shouted brief commands to guide the cadets. He never yelled in panic. His voice was like a steady drum in chaos. At one point, a raider tried to charge through the side tunnel. Arya saw him first and fired. The shot hit his shoulder, sending him spinning back. Ryan glanced at her and gave a small nod. Good, he said. Just that one word, but it filled her with a strange pride. Minutes felt like hours. The battle became smoke, light, and sound. When the last of the raiders began to retreat, the station was half in ruins. The outpost communication tower burned against the gray sky. Ryan lowered his weapon, scanning for survivors. He found one of the wounded raiders groaning near a wall and knelt beside him. The man's breathing was weak. Arya watched as Ryan removed his glove and pressed a bandage over the alien's wound. You're helping him? She asked softly. Ryan didn't look up. "He's not the enemy anymore," he said. "He's just someone dying." Something in his tone made her chest tighten. It wasn't pity, it was something deeper, a kind of tired mercy. When the captain and the remaining cadets rejoined them, Ryan was already setting up a distress beacon. "Evac ship will come in 20 minutes, he said. "Until then, keep your weapons up." As the wind carried the dust across the burning horizon, Arya stood beside him in silence. Her uniform was torn, her hands still shaking, but her eyes stayed on the man who had just saved them all. Finally, she spoke. "You fight like it's easy for you." Ryan shook his head. "It's never easy. It's just necessary." Arya wanted to ask what he meant, but before she could, he turned toward the hills again, watching the smoke rise. In that moment, she realized something. He wasn't proud of what he had done. He was burdened by it. The others began to celebrate their survival, laughing in disbelief. But Arya stayed quiet. She could see what they couldn't. The human wasn't made of peace or rage. He was made of control, of power held back until the moment it was needed. And as the sons of Valora sank into the dust, she understood that the stories she had grown up believing were wrong. Humans didn't forget how to fight. They simply carried that fire inside, waiting for the day someone forced them to light it again. The evacuation ship arrived late. By the time its engines rumbled through the gray sky, the outpost had turned into a quiet field of smoke and twisted metal. The fires were dying out, leaving behind only the smell of burnt dust and melted wiring. Arya stood near the landing pad, still holding the rifle Ryan had given her. She didn't know if she should feel proud or terrified. Around her, the other cadets whispered about what had happened. "He fought like a machine," one of them said in disbelief. "How can a diplomat fight like that?" Another added softly, "He didn't even look angry." That was the scariest part. Arya didn't answer. She kept her eyes on Ryan, who was helping load the wounded onto the ship. He moved quietly, with no sign of exhaustion, though his uniform was torn and his hands were covered in dust and small cuts. When one of the injured raiders moaned in pain, Ryan didn't ignore him. He knelt beside the alien, checked his pulse, and wrapped a bandage around his arm. The alien looked confused. You're human?" he asked weakly. Ryan nodded once. "Yeah." The raider's eyes widened in fear. "We were told you're kind." "I know," Ryan said, standing up. "You were told we don't fight anymore." Arya watched in silence. Something about that simple exchange felt heavier than all the gunfire that had filled the day. She wanted to understand who this man really was. But the more she saw, the more mysterious he became. When the ship lifted off, the crew sat quietly in the cabin. No one spoke. Captain Velen sat near the front, his face pale, still processing what had happened. Arya sat across from Ryan. The ship's interior lights flickered softly, casting thin shadows across his face. He was staring at nothing, lost in thought. After a long silence, she finally asked, "How did you learn to fight like that?" Ryan didn't answer right away. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and calm. "I used to be a soldier." "A long time ago? A soldier?" Arya repeated, surprised. "But humans don't have wars anymore." He gave a small, tired smile. "That's what people like to believe. But just because the galaxy calls something peaceful doesn't mean everyone follows the same rule. There are always places where peace ends." Arya leaned forward slightly. "So you fought before becoming an envoy?" He nodded. "I was in the Terran Defense Forces during the Orion rebellions. It was supposed to be the last human war." He looked down at his hands for a moment. "I stayed behind after it ended, helped rebuild. After seeing too much destruction, you start to understand what peace really means." Arya listened closely. His words didn't sound proud or heroic. They sounded like someone who carried too many memories he wished he could forget. "Then why do people say humans don't fight?" she asked quietly. Ryan's eyes met hers. "Because we stopped showing it. The universe needed someone to prove that peace could exist, so humanity became that example. But peace doesn't erase what we are. It just teaches us when to use it." Arya didn't know what to say. His words sank deep into her thoughts. She realized how wrong her academy lessons had been. The teacher spoke of humans as fragile and soft-hearted. But sitting across from Ryan Hale, she saw something far different. Strength controlled by kindness. The ship touched down at a nearby colony base where they would wait for a full report. When the hatch opened, the group was greeted by local officers who had heard rumors of the AIE attack. Reporters and analysts began asking questions. wanting to know how a small squad had survived a full raider ambush. Ryan ignored them. He walked past quietly, heading for the medical wing. Arya followed him, unable to stop herself. When he reached the corridor, she said, "Commander." He stopped but didn't turn around. "Yes, you could have left," she said. "You could have stayed safe in the ship when the raiders attacked. But you didn't." He faced her slowly, his gray eyes steady. "If I hadn't fought, you'd all be dead," he said simply. "That's not something I could watch happen." Arya took a small breath. "You risked your life for people you barely knew." Ryan gave a faint smile. "That's what soldiers do, even when they stop wearing uniforms." Then he walked away toward the med bay. Arya stood there staring after him. Around her, the base buzzed with new activity. Officers shouting orders, repair crews unloading supplies, but her mind was far away. She remembered his words about peace and strength. And for the first time, she began to see what true control meant. Later that night, she found herself sitting alone on the balcony of the barracks. The twin moons of Valora glowed faintly through the thin clouds. She could see the landing pad below where Ryan's ship was being repaired. He was still there, helping the mechanics. Even after everything, he didn't rest. Arya whispered to herself. They said humans no longer fought. But maybe that's not true. "You don't rest much, do you?" she asked softly from the doorway. Ryan looked up, a faint smile on his tired face. "I'll rest when I stop finding broken things," he said. Arya stepped closer. "That could take forever." "Maybe," he said. "But it keeps me useful." She sat on a nearby bench watching him work. The medbay smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal. The other cadets whispered about the human behind his back. Some called him brave. Others called him dangerous. But none of them understood him. Arya wanted to. "Why do you help everyone?" she asked after a moment. "Even the ones who attacked us?" Ryan paused, setting down the medical tool he was holding. His eyes softened. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it," he said quietly. "You don't forget things like that." Arya studied him. There was no pride in his voice and only honesty. "Is that why humans stopped fighting?" He shook his head slowly. "No. We stopped because we finally learned what fighting costs." He leaned back in his chair, looking distant for a moment. "There was a time when every generation of humans grew up with war. Every family lost someone. We were strong, yes, but we were also tired. When the last wars ended, we made a choice. Not to erase our strength, but to guide it. To teach our children that peace is not weakness, but control." Arya thought about his words. "Control," she repeated softly. "That's what you did on the outpost. You didn't fight like a wild soldier. You fought like someone who knew when to stop." Ryan gave a small nod. "That's the hardest part. Stopping when you can keep going." A voice crackled through the base speakers, interrupting them. "Commander Hale, report to Command Room 2. The Council wants a debrief." Ryan sighed and stood. "Duty calls," he said, giving her a small nod. "Stay out of trouble, Cadet." Arya smiled faintly. "No promises." Later that day, Arya was called into the command chamber as well. She stood quietly in the corner while senior officers spoke with Ryan. A holographic display flickered in the center of the room, showing the remains of the destroyed outpost. One of the council officers, a tall alien with blue skin and narrow eyes, leaned forward. "We reviewed your report, Commander," he said. "The attack was unexpected, but your response was remarkable. Still, there is concern." "Concern?" Ryan asked calmly. "Yes," the officer replied. "Your level of force. The Council promotes nonviolence. Your actions could be seen as aggressive." Arya felt anger rising in her chest, but she stayed silent. Ryan didn't react. He folded his hands behind his back and said evenly, "If I hadn't acted, everyone in that room would be dead. Nonviolence means nothing if it only exists in theory." The officer frowned. "You sound like the old Terran commanders. The galaxy moved past that." Ryan's voice remained steady. "No, the galaxy just forgot why peace matters. It only survives when someone is willing to protect it." The room fell silent. Even the officers who disagreed with him looked uncertain. Arya watched him and felt pride swell in her chest. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply speaking truth. When the meeting ended, Arya followed him out. "You spoke boldly," she said. He shrugged lightly. "Someone had to." They walked along the base corridor, their steps echoing on the metal floor. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Arya hesitated, then said quietly, I think I understand now. Humans don't fight because they want to win. They fight because they want peace to live. Ryan looked at her for a moment, then nodded. That's the best way I've heard it said. A communication drone buzzed overhead, dropping a message capsule into Ryan's hand. He read it, then tucked it away. We're being reassigned, he said. New colony. Border sector. More raiders? Probably. Trouble always finds the quiet places. Arya smiled faintly. Then I hope I'm assigned there too. He raised an eyebrow. You don't scare easy anymore, do you? She met his gaze. Not after meeting you. For a second, the corner of his mouth twitched into a rare, genuine smile. Then he walked away toward the hangar, his shadow stretching long in the evening light. That night, Arya stood by the viewport of the barracks, watching stars rise over the horizon. She thought about everything he had said, about strength, control, and the cost of peace. The Academy had always told her that humans were finished with violence. But now she knew the truth. They hadn't forgotten how to fight. They had simply learned why to fight. From the moment they arrived, Ryan began inspecting everything. The defenses, the communication towers, even the food storage. He didn't talk much, but when he gave an order, everyone listened. Arya noticed how the soldiers stood straighter when he walked by. They trusted him, even those who had once feared him. One evening, Arya found him standing outside near the perimeter lights. The suns were setting behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and red. Ryan stood with his hands behind his back, eyes scanning the horizon. You never stop watching, Arya said softly, stepping beside him. Ryan didn't look away from the distance. Out here, quiet can be a warning. She followed his gaze. There was nothing but dust and fading sunlight. You think they'll come again? He finally turned to her. Raiders don't give up after one defeat. They'll be back, and maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. The question is whether we'll be ready. Arya looked down. We will be. You trained us, he smiled faintly. Training isn't the same as experience, cadet. Then his tone softened. But you're learning fast. That night the wind grew stronger. The colony lights flickered, and the communication relay kept cutting off. Arya couldn't sleep, so she sat near the barracks window, watching the guard patrols move like small dots of light. The world felt tense, like the air was waiting to break. Suddenly, a sharp alarm echoed across the base. Red lights flashed through the halls. Arya jumped to her feet and grabbed her gear. Outside, voices shouted orders. The ground shook faintly under her boots. She ran to the command post where Ryan was already standing beside Captain Velen, studying the radar display. Dots appeared on the screen, dozens of fast-moving signals heading toward them. Multiple ships, Velen said, panic in his voice. We don't have the numbers to fight this. Ryan's voice stayed calm. Then we don't fight their way. We make them fight ours. He turned to Arya. Evacuate the civilians to the inner shelter. I'll handle the defense line. Arya hesitated. You can't hold the wall alone. I won't be alone, he said, giving her a steady look. I'll have you. Those words made her heart tighten, but she nodded without another question. Within minutes, the colony turned into a storm of movement. The wind howled across the landing field as ships appeared in the sky, black, jagged, and fast. Laser fire lit up the dusk like lightning. The raiders had returned, and this time they came with an army. Ryan's orders were sharp and simple. Cut their visibility. Turn off the outer lights. Make them come to us. The colony fell into near darkness except for the glow of the shields and weapons fire. Ryan moved through the chaos with calm precision, helping soldiers aim, patching the defense grid, and shouting short commands that kept panic from spreading. Arya fought beside him, her hand steady on the rifle, remembering every lesson he had taught. She didn't feel fear anymore and only focus. Explosions shook the outer wall. Dust and sparks rained from above. Ryan pulled Arya aside just before a blast hit the spot where they had been standing. She coughed through the smoke, her ears ringing. You all right? He asked quickly. She nodded. Still here, he smiled slightly. Good, stay that way. The fight lasted for hours. The raiders pushed harder each time, but the colony held. Ryan's calm voice carried through the comms, keeping everyone coordinated. His plans turned every weakness into a trap, every broken wall into bait. The attackers had come expecting fear. What they found instead was strategy. Human strategy. Finally, as dawn began to rise, the raiders' ships started to retreat. Their signals vanished from the radar one by one. The air was filled with the sound of engines fading into the distance. When the shooting stopped, the soldiers cheered. Some cried, some laughed in disbelief. Arya looked at Ryan. He wasn't cheering. He just stood still, watching the sunrise, breathing slowly. "You did it," she said, stepping closer. "You saved them again." He shook his head gently. "No, we did." Arya smiled, but her chest felt heavy. "Then why don't you look happy?" Ryan's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Because every time I fight, it reminds me of what I swore to stop doing. Peace feels further away each time." She looked at him quietly. "But you also reminded us what real peace is. It's not hiding. It's standing up when it matters." Ryan finally turned to her, his expression softer now. "Maybe you'll be the one to teach the next generation that," he said. Before she could answer, a young officer ran up with a message pad. "Commander, incoming transmission from the Raider flagship. They're requesting a ceasefire." Ryan blinked, surprised. "A ceasefire?" "Yes, sir. Their leader says they didn't know humans were stationed here. They're pulling back and won't return." Ryan exhaled slowly. "Then it's over." Arya felt a strange chill. Even the Raiders, the most feared fighters in the sector, had been scared by one human. As the colony crew began repairs, the story spread fast. Across the frontier, people started whispering again. "There's a human out there who fights like the old ones." Raiders fled from sectors where they thought he might be. Commanders used his name to calm frightened recruits. That night, Arya stood outside, staring at the stars. Ryan walked past her quietly, his face calm but distant. "Commander," she said, "the galaxy is going to remember what happened here." He looked at the sky for a long moment before replying, "Maybe, but I hope they remember why it happened, why not how." The colony returned to life slowly. The smell of smoke faded, and the sound of hammers replaced the sound of gunfire. Engineers worked through the days, patching walls, fixing comms, and clearing debris. The suns of Valora rose and set as if nothing had happened, but everyone in the colony knew the truth. Everything had changed. Arya stood on the watchtower, looking over the quiet landscape. The hills that once hid raiders were now empty, their ships long gone. The colony had survived because of one man, the human who had refused to believe that peace meant weakness. Down below, Commander Ryan Hale walked through the camp, inspecting the workers, helping where he could. He didn't act like a hero. He didn't give speeches or demand attention. He just worked, silent and steady, carrying crates, checking defenses, and talking gently to the wounded. The soldiers watched him with quiet respect. Some even smiled when they saw him pass. Arya climbed down and joined him near the landing field. "You know," she said with a small smile, "you've become famous. The other colonies are talking about the human who made raiders surrender." Ryan shook his head. "Fame isn't worth much. People forget the truth when they start telling stories." She tilted her head. "Then what's the truth?" He looked out toward the horizon. That a group of good people stood their ground. That they fought because they had to. That's enough. Arya walked beside him as they headed toward the command center. The air was cooler now, soft and calm. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. Ryan glanced at her. "Raiders always come back. But next time they'll think twice before attacking humans." She smiled. "You sound proud." "I'm not proud," he said quietly. "Just relieved." Later that evening, a ship arrived from the Central Fleet. A Terran diplomat and 2 council officers stepped out, their uniforms spotless, their faces full of polite smiles. They came to review the battle and collect official reports. The soldiers lined up, standing straight as the officers spoke words of praise. But when they asked for Commander Ryan Hale, the crowd went silent. Ryan stepped forward, his uniform worn and dusty, his eyes tired but calm. The diplomat smiled warmly. "Commander Hale, your actions have inspired many across the frontier. The Council wishes to award you the Star of Peace for bravery." Arya watched as Ryan hesitated. The officer held out the medal, a bright silver star with a small blue light at its center. For a long moment, Ryan just stared at it. Then he said quietly, "With respect, sir, I can't accept that." The officers looked confused. "You can't?" Ryan shook his head. "Peace isn't something you get rewarded for. It's something you protect quietly. Give the medal to the people who built this colony, not to me." The officers exchanged uncertain looks, but they didn't argue. They nodded, placed the medal on the command table, and left shortly after. When they were gone, Arya approached him. "You really don't want it?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I don't fight for medals." "Then why do you fight?" Ryan took a long breath. The wind rustled through his hair as he looked toward the sunset. "Because someone has to stand between danger and the innocent. Because if people like me stop fighting completely, others pay the price. I fight so they can live in peace." Arya was silent for a moment, then said softly, "That's what makes you different. You fight without hate." Ryan looked at her, his eyes gentle. "Hate destroys peace. Duty protects it." Days passed and repairs continued. Soon the colony was strong again. The people smiled more. The markets reopened and children played outside the shelters. Life returned, but the story of that battle spread far beyond the hills. On other planets, soldiers whispered about the quiet human of Valora. Traders repeated tales of the man who fought like lightning, but spoke like calm rain. Even the raiders began to tell their own version, about the human whose eyes turned war into silence. Arya wrote her report for the academy. Her hands shook as she tried to find the right words. At last she wrote, "Humans no longer fight for power or territory. They fight for others. Their peace is not weakness. It is strength wrapped in mercy." When she handed it to her commander, he read it slowly, then gave a small nod. "You understand now?" "Yes," she said. "Because I met one." That night, Ryan prepared to leave. His next mission was unknown. Another border, another colony in need. Arya stood by the landing pad as the engines of his small ship hummed softly. "You're leaving without saying goodbye?" she asked. He smiled slightly. "Goodbyes make things heavier. You'll see me again one way or another." She stepped closer. "You think I'll forget what you taught me?" He shook his head. "I think you'll teach others what I taught you." The engines grew louder. Dust swirled around them as the ship rose into the sky. Arya watched it climb higher and higher until it vanished into the golden light of morning. For a long time she stood there alone, her heart filled with both pride and sadness. Then she whispered to herself, "He was proof that peace doesn't mean surrender. It means strength in silence." As she turned back toward the colony, the sun rose fully over Valora, casting light across the rebuilt walls and bright towers. The people of the colony began another day, unaware that their survival had already become part of legend.